My apologies for that false start. I'm not sure. Technical problems. As I said, this is the Rashi class for this week, the third Aliyah of Acharei Mot, which was my grandfather's bar mitzvah parsha. So we'll learn in memory of Shmuel ben Tzvi, and also in memory on today, Yom HaZikaron, all those who fell fighting for Israel, all those who served and were killed defending the state and the land of Israel and its people, and all those who were murdered in terrorist attacks, all of whom we remember today on Yom HaZikaron, this day of Israeli remembrance. On different occasions, Rashi does different things. Last week we saw that we had a very complicated and difficult to understand set of verses about tsaras, about biblical leprosy, with white patches and red patches and sunken patches and spreading patches and hairs and this, that, and the other thing. And it's just very difficult to understand what the verses mean. And so Rashi comes along principally to tell us what the verses mean. On other occasions, Rashi is responding to problems in the text, where the text of the Torah raises questions, or is difficult to understand, not because we don't know what the words refer to, but because there may be contradictions, or there may be difficulties in terms of our wider knowledge of what went on in biblical times afterwards. And that's the case on this occasion. These verses in Acharei Mot are difficult to understand because they seem to contradict other elements we know. So we're going to begin with chapter 16, verse 32 of Leviticus, and I'll raise the problems that are bothering Rashi. In fact, there's a whole book called What's Bothering Rashi, which deals with these sorts of questions. And then we'll see how Rashi answers them, not on his own, but drawing down on the tradition, which has been aware of these problems all along, and gives us the solutions to them. So let's look at chapter 16, verse 32. V'chiper ha-Kohen, and the priest shall atone, or shall bring about atonement. Chiper, same word as Yom HaKippur. Now, which sort of Kohen? Asher yimshach oso, who has been anointed, v'asher yimalei es yado, lechahein, tachas aviv, and who has been consecrated. Yimalei es yado means consecrated to be a priest in place of his father. V'lavash es bigdei habad, bigdei hakodesh, and he shall dress in the linen garments, which are holy garments, which are consecrated, sacred, or distinguished garments. Now, there are a series of problems in this verse. It describes the Kohen going through two rituals. First, he's been anointed, and also he has been consecrated. Now, are these two necessary factors for him to serve, or are they an either or? The word vav, the letter vav, can mean and, or it can mean or. So when it says the Kohen has been anointed, va'asher, and who has been, does it mean and who has been, or who has been? Or has been consecrated for that particular role. In addition, tachas aviv, in place of his father, is there some hereditary right to the priesthood? We know there is for individual priests. You're a priest if your father was a priest. But what about the high priesthood? Is the high priesthood also to be passed down from father to son? We know that wasn't true historically, that not every high priest was the son of another high priest. So we're going to have to work these things out. So let's see what Rashi says. V'chiper Kohen asher yimshach, and the Kohen has been anointed shall perform the atonement ritual, because as Rashi says, kaparazo shel Yom Kippurim. This is the ritual of Yom Kippur, which was led by the high priest. For the rest of the year, there was a rota of priests who carried out the different functions in the tabernacle and then in the temple. But on the Day of Atonement, the high priest would be the only person who would take part in the most sacred rituals, which was particularly going into the Holy of Holies and offering the incense, and also sacrificing the goat, sacrificing the bull, and sending the scapegoat off into the wilderness. Eino kashera ella b'Kohen Gadol. The entire atonement service is only fit, is only proper when it's performed by the high priest himself. Now, lefi shenemra kol parsha ba'Aaron, but seeing as all the way through we've only talked about Aaron, the first high priest, the brother of Moses, well, what happens when Aaron dies? who's going to take over? Hutzrach loma b'Kohen Gadol bar ba'acharav sheyeh kamoha. Therefore, we have to say any high priest who follows. So, until now, the text has talked about Aaron, who of course was the high priest at the time when the Torah was given. But in order to make this a permanent and established regulation, we need to have a provision for those who will succeed him, and that's what this verse is going to tell us all about. Va'asher yimalei yado, and also who has been consecrated. So a high priest has been anointed, and a high priest has been consecrated. Now, this is very important. Ein li ela hamashuach b'shem hamishcha, meruba begadim minayin. Now, see, if I only was told in the start of this verse that an anointed priest can take this role, then what about the meruba begadim? Now, this is a particular type of high priest who appeared in the Second Temple period. In the First Temple period, there was what was known as the shemen hamishcha, the anointing oil, which was olive oil infused with many spices and became a very fragrant oil. And just as monarchs are anointed today, the high priest, just like a king in ancient Israel, was anointed with the shemen hamishcha, with this special anointing oil. And that's what made him fit to take on the role and made him a fully operational high priest. However, in the Second Temple period, there was no shemen hamishcha. There was no anointing oil. The technique for creating it was lost, and therefore it was not created, and therefore no high priest in the Second Temple period was anointed with the shemen hamishcha, with the anointing oil. Which raises the question, how on earth could they perform the ritual? Because if you read the verse in such a way that you read the vav to mean an and, he has been anointed and he's been consecrated, it seems that he's lacking one of those two essential elements. He may have the consecration, but he does not have the anointing. And therefore, Rashi, on the basis of the Gemara in Horius, tells us that the vav is not an and vav, it's an or vav. If he's not been anointed, he can at least be consecrated. Talmud Loma va'asher yimalei es yado. That's why it says, not only if he's anointed, but also if he has been consecrated. V'heim kol ha'kohanim gadolim, and this applied to all of the high priests, she'amdu miYoshiyahu ve'elach, from the time of King Josiah and onwards, she'biyamav nigzara selochis shel shemen hamishcha, because from that time onwards was hidden the jar which contained the anointing oil. So not just in the Second Temple period, but even at the end of the First Temple period, the anointing oil was hidden, and therefore no high priest could receive that anointing, and yet they carried on doing their job. Why? Because they were consecrated. It's an either or, either be anointed or be consecrated. Now, the question of succession. Does one automatically succeed one's father as the high priest? So the verse says, L'chahen tachas aviv, to serve in place of his father. Lamed she'im beno memalei es mekomo, hu kodem l'chol adam. This teaches not that there is an automatic right to succession. So when the queen eventually passes away, Prince Charles becomes king automatically. At the very moment the queen dies, Prince Charles becomes the king. That's inevitable and unavoidable. That's not true of a high priest. When a high priest dies, his son has first option if he's worthy. If the son of a high priest is worthy to take his father's role, then he becomes high priest in his place. But if he's not worthy, then the high priesthood goes to somebody else. And this explains why, despite this language taking the place of his father, which seems to be indicating a very tight succession from father to son, why this was not always the case historically, why high priests were not always the sons of high priests, because if the son isn't worthy, then the high priesthood goes to somebody else. By the way, this is also true technically of the rabbinate. So in Eastern Europe there was a presumption that if the son of the rabbi of a community was worthy, then he would succeed his father to that role. If he wasn't worthy, then it would go to somebody else. But the son of the existing rabbi had the priority to be considered, and if he was worthy, then it would not go to an outsider. It would just pass down from father to son. And of course, the rebbes of Hasidic dynasties work in the same way as well, that a son almost always succeeds the father as Rebbe, and if the Rebbe doesn't have a son, then it goes to a nephew or some other relation. But certainly the son of a Rebbe has the first option if he's worthy to the task of succeeding his father. A couple of verses on, verse 34. V'haysa zos lachem nechuchas olam lechaper al b'nei Yisrael. Now this should be, or will be, a law for you for all time, to lechaper al b'nei Yisrael mikol chatosam, to make atonement for the children of Israel from all of their sins, achas b'shana, once a year. This obviously refers to the Day of Atonement. This annual atonement for the sins of the Jewish people takes place on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement. And then seemingly a superfluous line, Vayas kasher siva Hashem es Moshe. And he, that is to say Aaron, who's been commanded here, he did according to that which God commanded Moses. That seems to be a superfluous conclusion to the verse, telling us unnecessarily, it seems, that Aaron did as Moses had been commanded. So what's this about? Vayas kasher siva Hashem es Moshe, Rashi says, kasher higia Yom Kippurim asa kaseda hazeh, that when Yom Kippur came around, Aaron did exactly according to the order of the service that has been set out in all the previous verses, even before the ones we began to look at. La'agid shivcho shel Aaron, in order to tell the praise of Aaron. Now this is a particularly interesting part of the explanation. Not just that he carried out the functions, he performed the proper slaughtering and sprinkling of the blood and burning of the parts and the burning of the incense and so on, but in particular an element which corresponds or relates to Aaron's personal qualities. Shelo haya lovshan ligdulaso. He didn't put on fancy clothes for his own aggrandizement. The high priest wore very, very elaborate vestments. On some occasions on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur, they were plain white, but other times during the year, and even on the Day of Atonement itself, he wore many items of gold, the breastplate and the tzitz, the frontlet on his forehead. But he wasn't wearing these clothes for his own pomp and ceremony. Ella kim kayem gezeras hamelach, but rather only in order to fulfill the instruction of the king, that is to say God. So when Aaron carried out these instructions, it wasn't just, it wasn't for his own glory, it was really only because he'd been commanded. So I suppose we have two explanations here. One is to tell you that Aaron carried out what he was told to carry out. That's a basic explanation. He was obedient to God's command, which we'd expect anyway. But you should know that in particular, it wasn't only that he did what he was told, he didn't do any more than he was told, and he only did it because he was told. He was not interested in looking like the star of the show. That wasn't of interest to him. What interested him was doing what God wanted him to do. And that's why he dressed in these clothes, and that's why he performed the service as he was commanded. That concludes our Rashi for this morning. I hope everyone has a very healthy and happy week. Please God, the news looks good, and we hope that it continues to look good. And if you need anything from me or from the shul, please do be in touch. God bless.